You have until Friday, Mom. After that, the movers come whether you're here or not. Grace Hollowell held the phone away from her ear and looked at it like it had bitten her. Her son's voice, Kevin, 43, the boy she'd taught to tie his shoes on this very porch, was still talking, but the words had turned into a sound she couldn't process, like a radio tuned between stations. Kevin, she said, this is my house. It was your house. Dad left it to both of us. I've got a buyer, Mom. $310,000. Split down the middle, you get $155,000. That's enough for a nice assisted living place in... I'm 67 years old. I'm not going to assisted living. Then find an apartment. I don't care, but the house sells Friday. Your father built this house. Dad's dead, Mom. Has been for 2 years. And I've got a kid starting college in September and a second mortgage I can't cover. I need this money. I'm sorry, but I need it. He wasn't sorry. Grace could hear it in the way he said it. Fast, rehearsed, the sorry already behind him before it left his mouth. What about Lily? Grace asked. Her daughter, 39, the one who used to call every Sunday. Lily agrees with me. Lily agreed or Lily didn't argue. Silence. Then, Friday, Mom, pack what you can carry. Click. Grace sat on the porch of the house Earl Hollowell had built with his own hands in 1986. The paint was peeling. The gutter sagged on the east side. The garden she'd kept for 38 years needed weeding, and the front step had a crack that Earl had always said he'd fix next weekend. Every weekend. Until there were no more weekends. She was 67. She had $4,200 in savings. Social Security of $1,340 a month. Arthritis in both knees. And as of Friday, no home. She picked up the phone again, called Lily. It rang 6 times. Voicemail. Lily, it's Mom. Call me back, please. I need to talk to you about the house. She stopped. What did she need? Permission to stay in her own home? Permission to exist? Just call me, she said, and hung up. Lily didn't call back. If you've ever been told you're in the way by the same people you gave everything to, this story is for you. Subscribe and stay until the end. Because what Grace found in an abandoned dugout on the edge of her hometown didn't just give her a place to live. It gave her back something her children had taken without even knowing its name. Friday came the way bad days always come. Too fast, too bright, and without mercy. The movers arrived at 8 a.m. 2 men in a truck with Kevin's name on the work order. They were polite, professional. They didn't make eye contact with the old woman sitting on the porch step with a suitcase, a cardboard box, and a quilted bag she'd sewn herself 30 years ago. Kevin didn't come. He sent a text at 7:45. Movers will handle everything. Buyer does walk through at noon. Please be gone by 11. Please be gone. Like she was a stain on a carpet. Grace stood up. Her knees protested. Her back ached from a night of no sleep. She picked up the suitcase, clothes, medications, Earl's watch, a photo album, the quilt from their bed. The cardboard box held kitchen things, a cast iron skillet, a coffee mug Earl had given her on their 20th anniversary that said, World's Okayest Wife, a tin of tea, a can opener. Everything else stayed. 40 years of furniture, dishes, curtains, books. The chair Earl died in. The table where she'd served 10,000 dinners. The marks on the doorframe where she'd measured Kevin and Lily every birthday until they stopped coming home. She carried her things to the sidewalk, set them down, looked at the house one more time. Then she turned and walked. She didn't have a car. Earl's truck had died 6 months after he did, and she couldn't afford to fix it. She'd been walking everywhere since, The grocery store, the post office, the cemetery where Earl lay under a stone she'd picked because it had room for her name next to his. She walked 3 blocks to the bus stop, sat on the bench, opened her phone and looked at her bank account. $4,217.38, she calculated. First month, last month, security deposit on even the cheapest apartment in Briar Falls, $2,400 minimum. That would leave her $1,800. 1 month of groceries, medications, utilities, then nothing. The bus came. She didn't get on. She sat there for an hour. People passed. Nobody stopped. Nobody asked why an old woman was sitting on a bench with a suitcase at 9 a.m. on a Thursday looking like the world had ended. Then her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. "Grace, this is May Chen, Earl's cousin's wife. Heard what happened. I'm so sorry. If you need somewhere tonight, I have a spare room. Call me." Grace stared at the text. May Chen. She'd met her twice. Once at Earl's mother's funeral, once at a family reunion in 2014. They'd spoken maybe a total of 40 minutes in their entire lives. She called. "May? Grace? Oh, honey, are you okay?" "No." "Come stay with me. I'm on Ridgefield Road past the old co-op. The yellow house with the wind chimes. Stay as long as you need." "I can't impose." "It's not imposing. It's family. Even the distant kind." Grace picked up her suitcase, started walking. Ridgefield Road was 2 miles east. Her knees would hate her by the time she got there. She didn't care. Someone had said, "Come." That was enough. May Chen was 71, widowed, and built like a woman who'd spent her whole life lifting things heavier than herself. Her house was small, clean, and smelled like ginger and laundry soap. She had a cat named General So and a garden that put Grace's to shame. "Spare rooms upstairs," May said, taking Grace's suitcase like it weighed nothing. "Bathrooms at the end of the hall. Dinner's at 6. Don't argue." Grace didn't argue. That night, lying in a twin bed under a crocheted blanket in a stranger's house, Grace cried for the first time since Earl's funeral. Not quietly, not politely. The ugly, body-shaking kind that comes from a place deeper than sadness. The place where you keep the things you thought were permanent. May heard her through the wall. She didn't knock. She didn't intrude. She just slid a cup of tea under the door with a note that said, "Tomorrow will be different. M." Tap like if you believe that the smallest act of kindness can save someone's life. Because what happened the next day changed Grace's life in a way she never could have imagined. Morning came gray and cold. Grace woke stiff, disoriented, her eyes swollen. She found May in the kitchen making oatmeal. "Eat," May said. "Then I want to show you something." They drove in May's pickup truck, a vehicle older than most of the roads it traveled. East out of Briar Falls, past the old co-op, past the farm supply store, past the edge of where the town considered itself the town. "Where are we going?" Grace asked. "Earl ever tell you about his grandfather's homestead?" Grace frowned. "Walter Hollowell? He had a place out here somewhere. Earl mentioned it a few times. Said it was nothing. Just a piece of land with an old root cellar." "Not a root cellar," May said, turning onto a dirt road that rattled the truck's frame. "A dugout, like the original settlers built. Half in the ground, half above. Walter lived in it during the Depression when he couldn't afford anything else. Built it with his own hands out of whatever he could find." "Why are you showing me this?" May stopped the truck at the edge of a clearing. Tall grass, a line of cottonwood trees along a creek, and in the hillside, half hidden by wild brush and decades of neglect, A door. Because it's yours, May said. Grace stared. Walter's land, 6 acres, passed to his son, then to Earl's father, then to Earl. It wasn't part of the house deed. Kevin doesn't know about it. It was never in the will because Earl's father never filed proper papers on it. But it's Hollowell land. Has been since 1931. How do you know this? Because Earl told my husband about it years ago. Said he was going to fix it up someday. A project for retirement. May's voice softened. He never got retirement, did he? Grace opened the truck door, stepped out. The air smelled like creek water and sage and something old, not rotten, just patient. The way things smell when they've been waiting. She walked toward the hillside. The door was heavy. Planks of oak, gray with age, held together with iron hinges that had rusted but not broken. She pulled. It resisted. She pulled harder. The door groaned open. Inside was dark. Cool. The smell of earth. Deep. Mineral. Alive. May handed her a flashlight from the truck. Grace stepped in. The dugout was larger than she'd expected. The front room was maybe 15 feet by 12, with walls that were half packed earth and half fieldstone. The ceiling was low, timber beams laid across the top, covered with sod that had long since grown into a living roof of grass and wildflowers. The floor was hard-packed dirt, swept clean by some impossible wind or maybe just by time. Against the back wall stood a cast iron wood stove, small but solid, with a pipe that ran up through the ceiling. Beside it, a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, a shelf with mason jars, empty now, but labeled in faded handwriting. Beans, corn, tomatoes. In the corner, a bed frame. Iron, no mattress. But the frame was sturdy, the welds clean, the work of a man who built things to last because he couldn't afford to build them twice. Grace ran her hand along the table. Her fingers left trails in the dust. Underneath the dust, the wood was smooth, sanded by hand, finished with care. Walter built all of this? She whispered. During the worst years of the Depression, he was 22, had nothing, dug into this hillside with a shovel, and lived here for 6 years until he saved enough to buy lumber for a proper house. Grace looked around the space. It was crude. No electricity, no plumbing, no insulation beyond the earth itself. It was everything her children would call unlivable. But it was standing. After 95 years, it was standing. May, Grace said slowly, is this legal? Can I actually live here? The land is Hollowell land. No liens, no taxes owed. Walter paid them through 1961, and after that, the county just forgot about it. I had Ruth Jeffries at the county clerk's office check. The parcel is still registered to the Hollowell Family Trust. Kevin. Kevin doesn't know this parcel exists. It wasn't in Earl's will because it wasn't in Earl's name specifically. It's in the family trust, which means any Hollowell can claim it. Grace stood in the middle of the dugout. Cold air, dirt floor, no running water, no heat except a stove that hadn't been lit in decades. It was the most beautiful room she'd ever stood in. I'm staying, she said. May nodded like she'd expected nothing else. Then we've got work to do. They started that afternoon. May's truck made 3 trips to the hardware store. Grace spent her money carefully. $400 on a new stovepipe, fire bricks, and chimney cap. $150 on a camping cot, sleeping bag, and pillow. $60 on LED, lanterns and batteries. $35 on a water jug, a basin, and a bar of soap. The stove worked. That was the first miracle. Grace cleaned out 95 years of ash, replaced the cracked fire bricks, connected the new pipe, and lit a fire with newspaper and kindling from the cottonwood trees. Smoke rose, drew properly. The dugout warmed. She swept the floor, scrubbed the table and chairs with creek water and soap, set up the cot in the corner where the bed frame stood, hung a lantern from a ceiling beam. By nightfall, the dugout was livable. Barely, but livable. Grace ate soup heated on the wood stove. She drank tea from Earl's anniversary mug. She sat in a chair that Walter Hollowell had built with his hands during the worst economic collapse in American history. And she watched the fire. And she felt something she hadn't felt since Earl died. Ownership. Not of the land or the building. Of herself. Of her choices. Of the right to exist somewhere without permission from children who decided she was a problem to be solved. She slept better than she had in months. Word spread the way things spread in small towns, through glances and whispers between post offices and diners. Grace Hollowell is living in a hole in the ground. Half the town shook their heads. The other half showed up. Frank Moretti, retired contractor, 74, arrived Saturday with lumber. "Heard you need a porch," he said, and started building. Donna Kim from the thrift store brought blankets and kitchen supplies. Pastor Williams brought a cooler of casseroles. Ruth Jeffries' daughter, a plumber, ran a water line from the creek with a hand pump and filter. Day by day, the dugout transformed. Frank built a porch, reinforced the beams, cut a new window. Howard Bates ran a solar panel for lights and a phone charger. May came every day with seeds, beans, tomatoes, squash. Grace worked harder than she had in years. Her hands blistered. Her knees ached. But every nail she hammered was a sentence in a language she'd forgotten. "I am here. I am not leaving. I built this." If you've ever watched someone rebuild their life with nothing but stubbornness and the help of strangers who became family, stay with me. Because Grace hadn't found the most important thing in the dugout yet. And when she did, it changed not just her life, but the life of every person in Briar Falls. 3 weeks after Grace moved in, she decided to clean behind the wood stove. It was a practical decision. The gap between the stove and the wall had collected decades of soot and debris, and she was worried about fire risk. She pulled the stove forward, an inch at a time, the cast iron heavy enough to make her arms shake, and swept behind it with the brush. The brush hit something solid. Not stone. Not dirt. Wood. A flat piece of wood, set flush into the earthen wall, nearly invisible under the soot. Grace knelt, brushed away the grime, found edges, hinges, a small wooden door, maybe 2 feet square, built into the wall at floor level. She pulled it open. Behind it was a cavity in the earth, a space Walter had carved out, lined with flat stones and sealed. Inside the cavity sat a metal box, army surplus, olive green, latched but not locked. Grace pulled it out, set it on the table, opened it. Inside was a leather journal, thick, hand-bound, the pages yellowed but intact. On the first page, in careful handwriting, "Property of Walter James Hollowell, begun January 1932. Grace turned the pages. Walter had written in pencil. Small, neat letters that pressed into the paper with the deliberate care of a man who couldn't waste anything, not even graphite. The journal was a record, not just of Walter's life in the dugout, though that was there, the daily details of survival, the weather, the crops, the animals, but of something larger. Walter had been the town's unofficial record keeper. During the Depression, when banks collapsed and courthouses burned and documents disappeared, Walter had walked Briar Falls farm to farm, house to house, and recorded everything. Who owned what? Which families had been cheated by the bank? which properties had been seized illegally, which debts had been paid but never acknowledged. He'd done it because he'd watched his own parents lose their farm to a bank that couldn't produce the original mortgage papers. The bank said the papers had been destroyed in a fire. Walter's father said he'd paid off the mortgage in 1928 and had a receipt. The bank said the receipt was forged. The farm was seized. Walter was 16. He swore he'd never let it happen again. Not to himself, not to anyone. So he built his own record. A shadow archive of every transaction, every handshake deal, every payment made and received in Briar Falls during the years when the official records couldn't be trusted. The journal contained 412 entries spanning from 1932 to 1961. Grace read it over 3 days. Some entries were mundane: crop yields, weather patterns, livestock trades. But others were explosive. Entry 147, dated March 1938. Harlan Briggs approached the Dawson family and offered to hold their deed during the bank audit. Dawson family surrendered the deed in good faith. Briggs never returned it. The Dawson property, 120 acres on the North Ridge, now appears in county records under Briggs Holdings. Entry 203, dated June 1941. Confirmed that 4 additional families have lost properties through the same method. Briggs holds deeds under a company name. Families have no documentation to prove ownership. I have copied the original transfer records and stored them here. Grace's hands trembled. She turned to the back of the journal. Tucked between the final pages were documents. Thin, fragile, but legible. Original transfer records, handwritten receipts, copies of deeds, all documenting property transactions that had been erased from the official county records during the Depression. The Dawson family, the Moretti family, the Kim family, the Jeffries family, Frank Moretti, Donna Kim, Ruth Jeffries, the families who'd helped Grace rebuild. Their grandparents had been robbed, and Walter Hollowell had hidden the proof. Grace drove to town in May's truck. She brought the journal to Ruth Jeffries at the county clerk's office. Ruth read the entries about her family. Her hands shook. Her eyes filled. "My grandmother always said we owned land on the North Ridge," Ruth whispered. "She said the bank took it. My grandfather never talked about it. He just went quiet, like something inside him broke." "It wasn't the bank," Grace said. "It was Harlan Briggs." Ruth looked up. "Briggs? As in Briggs Holdings, as in the Briggs family that still owns most of the commercial property in this town." The silence in the clerk's office lasted 10 seconds. It felt like an hour. "Grace," Ruth said carefully, "if these documents are authentic, if Walter's records can be verified, this isn't just about old property disputes. The Briggs family built their entire real estate portfolio on land they stole from families during the Depression. We're talking about the foundation of half the commercial district." "I know." "The current Briggs, Tom Briggs, he sits on the town council. He owns the shopping center. He owns the apartment complex where half the seniors in this town live. If this comes out, then it comes out." Ruth looked at the journal, at the documents, at the careful handwriting of a man who'd hidden the truth inside a wall because he knew that someday someone would need to find it. "I need to make copies," Ruth said, "and we need a lawyer." The lawyer was a woman named Sandra Okafor, young, sharp, from a firm in the city that specialized in property rights and historical claims. She drove out to Briar Falls on a Tuesday, spent 3 hours in Grace's dugout reading the journal by lantern light, and said, "This is real. This is actionable. And this is going to make some very powerful people very uncomfortable." "How uncomfortable?" The kind of uncomfortable that involves courtrooms, forensic accountants, and the potential unraveling of 90 years of fraudulent property ownership. Good, Grace said. They should be uncomfortable. The families they stole from have been uncomfortable since 1938. Tom Briggs found out on a Thursday, not from a lawyer's letter, from the Briar Falls Gazette, which ran a front-page story after Ruth Jeffries filed a formal petition with the county to review property records dating back to the 1930s. The headline read, "Depression-era property records discovered in local dugout raise questions about Briggs' family holdings." Tom Briggs was 58, well-fed, well-connected, and accustomed to being the most important person in any room he entered. He read the article in his office above the shopping center and called his lawyer before he finished the second paragraph. "Kill this," he said. "Tom, it's a public records petition. I can't kill it." Then discredit it. The old woman living in a dirt hole found some papers. Papers that are 90 years old. They could be forged. They could be fabricated. Nobody's going to take this seriously. The county clerk is taking it seriously. She's already contacted the state archives for verification. Ruth Jeffries? Her family's in those papers. She's biased. She's the county clerk. It's literally her job. Tom hung up, drove to the dugout. Grace was on the porch Frank had built, drinking tea when the black SUV pulled up. Tom Briggs got out wearing a polo shirt that probably cost more than Grace's monthly food budget. "Mrs. Hollowell," he said, walking toward the porch with a smile that didn't reach anywhere near his eyes. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," Grace said. She didn't stand up. She didn't invite him closer. "These documents you found? They're very old, probably unreliable. My family has owned property in this town for 3 generations. Everything was acquired legally. Your grandfather acquired it by tricking families into surrendering their deeds during a bank audit that he fabricated. Walter Hollowell documented every transaction. Names, dates, amounts. It's all in the journal." Tom's smile tightened. Walter Hollowell was a hermit who lived in a hole in the ground. He wasn't exactly a reliable source. "I live in that hole now," Grace said, "and I found his records. And the county clerk has verified that the original transfer documents match the gaps in the official property records. So I'd be careful about calling Walter unreliable, Mr. Briggs. He was more honest than your grandfather ever was." Tom stepped closer. His voice dropped. "Mrs. Hollowell, Grace, you're 67 years old, living without running water in a dugout your grandkids would be embarrassed by. I can make this easier for you. Sell me the journal. Name your price. $50,000? $100,000? Enough to buy a real house and live comfortably. You want to buy the evidence that your family stole from mine and everyone else's. I want to resolve this quietly. Quietly is how your grandfather operated. He took people's land quietly. He destroyed their records quietly. He built his fortune quietly, on the backs of families who couldn't fight back because the Depression had already broken them." Grace set down her tea. "I'm not quiet, Mr. Briggs. Not anymore." Tom's face hardened. "You're making a mistake." "No. Your grandfather made the mistake. You just inherited it." He left. The SUV kicked up dust on the dirt road. Grace watched it disappear and felt her heart hammering. Not from fear. From the unfamiliar electric sensation of standing her ground on ground that was actually hers. The legal process took 5 months. Sandra was methodical and relentless. She filed claims on behalf of 4 families, supported by Walter's records, verified against state archives. Tom Briggs fought hard. 3 lawyers, counter motions. He publicly questioned Grace's mental competence. A confused elderly woman making wild accusations based on papers she found in a dirt cellar. But the evidence held. Walter's handwriting was authenticated. The transfer records matched known signatures. The timeline of Briggs' acquisitions aligned perfectly with Walter's dates. The settlement came in March. Tom agreed to transfer ownership of 4 properties back to the families they'd been taken from, plus a financial settlement Sandra described as significant. Frank Moretti received 12 acres on the North Ridge, land his grandmother had talked about until the day she died. He drove to Grace's dugout the day the papers were signed, sat on the porch beside her. 74 years old, built like a tree stump, and he cried like a child. "My grandmother always knew," he said. "She told everyone. Nobody listened." "Walter listened," Grace said. "He wrote it down." "You found it." "I found it because Kevin kicked me out and I had nowhere else to go." Grace almost laughed. "He did me a favor and doesn't even know it." Kevin called 2 weeks after the Gazette ran the settlement story. Grace was in the garden. The beans were coming up. The tomatoes needed staking. The squash was spreading in every direction like it owned the place. "Mom." His voice was different, smaller. "Kevin, I saw the news. About the journal, the Briggs thing." "Yes. That's really something. What you did." "What I did was survive. What Walter did was the something." Silence. Then, "Mom, I'm sorry. About the house. About how I handled it. I was stressed and I wasn't thinking about you. I was thinking about the money." "I know. Can I come see you? See the place you're living?" Grace looked at the dugout. The porch Frank built. The solar panel Howard installed. The garden she'd planted with May. The creek running 20 feet away, catching afternoon light. "You can come," she said. "But Kevin, this isn't a visit where you tell me what I should do differently. This is my home. I chose it. I'm staying." "Okay, Mom. And bring Lily." He came on a Saturday. Lily came too. First time Grace had seen her daughter in 14 months. They stood at the edge of the clearing and stared at the dugout like they'd landed on another planet. "Mom," Kevin said. It's a home," Grace finished. "It's been a home since 1932. Your great-great-grandfather built it when he had nothing. And I rebuilt it when I had nothing. We're Hollowells. This is what we do." Lily was crying. She hugged Grace so hard the old woman's knees buckled. "I should have called back," Lily whispered. "I should have fought Kevin. I should have—" "You should have," Grace agreed. "But you're here now." They sat on the porch. Grace made tea on the wood stove. Kevin looked at the mason jars on the shelf, the journal on the table, the garden through the window. He was quiet for a long time. "Dad would have loved this," he said finally. "Your father always said he'd fix this place up someday." "I didn't know. There's a lot you don't know about this family, Kevin, because you were too busy deciding what we were worth to find out what we'd built. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a door, cracked open with light coming through. Spring settled over the clearing. The garden grew. The creek ran clear. Grace sat on her porch every evening and watched the sky change colors over land that had been in her family for almost 100 years. May came on Tuesdays. Frank came on Saturdays. Ruth brought county updates and gossip. Howard checked the solar panel once a month whether it needed it or not. And sometimes, in the quiet moments before dark, Grace opened Walter's journal and read his words. The careful, penciled observations of a man who'd survived the worst the world had to offer by digging into the earth and refusing to disappear. One entry, dated November 1933, She'd read so many times she had it memorized. Winter coming. Stove holds heat. Walls hold wind. This place is small, but it is mine. Nobody gave it to me. Nobody can take it. I built it with what I had, which was nothing but time and stubbornness. That turns out to be enough. Grace closed the journal, set it on the shelf beside the mason jars, pulled the quilt from Earl's bed around her shoulders. Time and stubbornness. That turned out to be enough.